Okay, I think we'll get started. So, welcome everyone. Good day. My name is Marie Muldowney, and I'm the Managing Director at CSI, a Moody's Analytics company. Thank you for joining our webinar, The Changing Tide, Empowering Women in Financial Services. We're looking at women in financial services today from two angles, women who are advisors and women who are seeking or being advised. So I once pointed out to an advisor that you should really take special consideration of the women you're advising. And the answer I received was, well, honestly, there's really no difference. It's all finances. Well, we're about to dispel that today, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you should consider your clients who are women, but also we'll talk about women as advisors. First of all, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So Canada is situated on the traditional territories of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, places that have long served as sites of meeting and exchange. We recognize and respect the traditional custodians of the lands and the waters around which we meet today. So today's webinar is being recorded. Any ratings, financial reporting analysis, projections, or other observations as part of the information provided are and must be construed as statements of opinion and not statements of fact or recommendations to purchase, sell, or hold any securities. We ask that no one record the session without Moody's explicit written permission. And lastly, no one has permission to quote any of the comments made or questions asked by the webinar audience. Additionally, the views and opinions expressed or referred to by the speakers are solely those of the speakers and not necessarily the views, opinions, policies, or positions of the Canadian Securities Institute or the institutions the speakers are employed at or are licensed under. Finally, all members of the audience, you are currently on mute. And if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So I would like to welcome today Neela White and Tiffany Harding. Both are longtime veterans of the financial services industry with plenty of experience in the advisory space. Neela White is a senior portfolio manager, aging specialist at Raymond James, and Tiffany Harding is AVP, Head of Professional Wealth and Insurance Advisory Services at Manulife. I'm really pleased to have both of you here with me today. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting session, and we're going to open the session with Neela White, who's going to be talking about this whole area from the point of view of the advisor. Tiffany will follow by the point of view of the client. So over to you, Neela.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for having me on the show today. And as Marie said, I think it'll be a very interesting conversation because this has been a conversation that all industries are having, and especially with the financial industry, as we're looking to try and get parity, 50% gender equality within representation in the financial industry. So on the agenda today, you can see I'll be discussing 7 points on how, what, and why, and thoughts we should be having when we think about encouraging people, females, to enjoy the financial advice industry. And part of that is understanding why and still does the gender gap still exist within the financial industry, and trying to dispel and overcome some of the male legacy thinking that still goes on within the industry, especially with the younger generation. On to the next. So why should the conversation be different? So as you can see from some of the headline news, there's still this pervasive attitude about women and women not being able to accommodate an actual profession, especially on the financial services side. So we see investment news that women advisors' skills are questioned by men disproportionately. The cost of caregiving, and I think we all can relate to that, falls disproportionately on women. So obviously that will affect any career, whether financial services or any other industry. 89% of females failed a financial literacy quiz. So right there we have the whole stigma of, am I smart enough? Can I do this? The trickle-down effect of caregiving on women. We know there's a bit of a barbell approach, and we know from the author of this article, it was commenting on raising families and having that interruption in your career, as well as later on in life, having to take care of our aging parents or those loved ones around us who need assistance. And we can all relate to this pre-pandemic, definitely during the pandemic, and even still now. that work-life balance is harder for women to manage, especially in the pandemic, because when things went into lockdown, we really were able to see how that affects us as females. And for the first time ever, it was probably given the visibility that it really, really required. Next slide. The statistics out there, between 15 to 20% of of financial advisors are women. And when we look at that number, you do have to question, why isn't a 50-50 split, especially when we think that there are females going into business programs, into MBA programs? Why would the number be so low? So when surveys are done, and it was through multiple surveys, what consistently kept coming up was that industry females were actually put off by factors such as the industry still being male dominated, sort of the pervasive thinking of the old boys club, that there's the potential for unsteady pay. So obviously, when you take on the role of advisor, your pay, as opposed to becoming salary, depending what firm you're at, can become based on what the client does and what's being done in the account. And the other one, which is a big one, and it affects both sides of the table, is the perception of giving advice that it's based primarily on financial calculations, as opposed to a bigger movement of it being holistic, it being intuitive, it being emotional. In a strategy marketing survey, 82% of graduates from financial programs were aware that financial advisory services was a career, but only 36% of the females were actually interested in going that route. And it was because the perception was that they personally had a lack of skill, and they also had a negative view of the industry. So some of the movies that are out there, it sure doesn't portray the industry in a positive light and in a intuitive or emotional light. Next slide. So factors, there are many factors still adding to the gender gap in advisory roles. In a couple of the studies, it had suggested that 24% of women are less likely to attain their first promotion than their male peers, even though they request them at a similar rate, a similar time in their careers. And from the studies, what it actually suggested is that there is still a difference in the way a man would enter the financial advisory role compared to a female. So females tend to work their way up. They tend to have a previous career possibly, or a previous career in financial services industry, but that when they entered as an assistant or maybe as a personal assistant, and then slowly transitioned into the role of advisor. Whereas with men, they tend to enter straight out of school. They were also more likely to have studied finance or other business programs. But when they entered, as opposed to entering as an assistant, they were already entering at associate level positions or immediately as part of somebody else's succession plan, whereas women didn't seem to have that opportunity. Obviously, I think we can all relate to this, no matter what our career is, but we're facing other concerns as females, and it is balancing family and work commitments. It is perceived pressure within the top. We know that we have to put in more hours, and more is expected of us. It's also was cited that they felt that there were too many politics, so office politics or rhetoric. And one of the ones that we can still see now is that there is a lack of female role models or apparent career paths. So if you start in the industry as an assistant, what do you need to do to take the next step? From there, what do you need to do, and what female role model is actually supporting you and guiding you through that career path? And there was also a lack of support and sponsorship compared to male peers. So male peers tended to have more male sponsorship and more male mentors. And something else that we're discussing every year, especially on International Women's Day, is that networks still have fewer and fewer women who can serve as sponsors, since upper level and corporate management are still predominantly male. Next slide, please. According to StatsCan, Canadian women have lower levels of financial literacy and confidence in their ability to manage money, oftentimes compared to men. And unfortunately, that perception and that stigma exists on both sides of the table, whether you're an advisor or whether you're a person looking for an advisor and you're female. In a 2021 study, it was a financial literacy survey, women were found to answer do not know on a multiple choice if that was one of the selections available. If that selection was available, they oftentimes answered correctly. So what we have to look at is where and when does this lack of confidence begin, and how do we dispel it now, especially with STEM programs, that women do have the equal ability to go into finance and rely on the knowledge that they have. Next slide. So career-related stress for women. Again, I think one of the big ones is parental leave. Many times I've spoken to people I've met at networking industry events, and parental leave seems to be one of the sensitive points of while I'm starting my career, just as things are maybe getting onto roll and I'm developing a reputation and I'm bringing on clients, that I also want to start a family. And that's going to be, 9 months of carrying a baby and then becoming a mother. And how do you adjust to the hours that you have to put in to develop a client base and develop your practice and who and what you are and who you serve, and also taking care of a little one. So that was a big one. Caregiver absenteeism, it was the sort of what sort of stigma and perception is around I can't come into work today. My baby has a fever. I can't come into work today. Somebody's sick. I have to go with somebody to an appointment to be advocate. All of those things that we encounter, and sort of in the older generation in our day, you would end up just calling in sick because there was no budging room to say, I need some personal time. Refusing overtime or working longer hours. We know that this is an issue. There's only 24 hours in a day, and we do need to figure out what that balance is so that we can be the best parent that we can be the best advisor that we can be. And burning the light at each end of the candle, it doesn't work well. It leads to burnout and stress-related illnesses. We see more often women also declining promotions because, again, of the use of time on one side to take care of family and what's needed to go into a promotion. And they're also less offered promotions because sometimes the absenteeism due to family and personal situations leads to this idea of less dedication, less dependable, which is point number 5, viewed as less committed, dependable, authoritative, therefore less chances at raises or promotions. And we tend not to put our hand up and say, pick me, I can do this. Also, negative role models. I sort of started at the beginning talking about some of the movies. Some of the movies out there, it certainly doesn't portray our industry in a value-based way. It portrays it in a very capitalistic way. And women on a whole, because there's more of an intuitive emotional bias, we can't relate to that as well. And generally just stigma. Stigma still exists now within the industry, especially with female advisors. And we have to do our best to disband that, because for the future generations and including our generation, we want to make sure that who we are as advisors represents who our clientele is. And, half the clientele out there are female, and they will relate better to another female providing them advice. Next slide, please. So this has a lot of words. I think a very big important one is noting that we as women are going to control $4 trillion in assets in 2021, but knowing as well that on the other side of the table, on my side of the table, we know that female investors are more comfortable because they feel that another female will understand their needs and their goals better. And we also have shown in studies that female investors are 2.5 times more likely to take investment risks or investment advice from a woman advisor. With $4 trillion coming on board in 2028, we want to make sure we have people that people feel that they can align with. We know that 80% of widows switch financial advisors after their husband's death. And the biggest reason why is they felt unheard and they feel disrespected. So oftentimes, and especially early on in my career, I remember being in client meetings, and the conversation would be really directed towards the spouse or the more dominant person within the relationship, and there was very little acknowledgement to the female in the relationship. And then suddenly this, I'm not sure how this happens, but you think the spouse dies, so the husband dies, that suddenly the wife is going to have a relationship with you and she's going to feel comfortable with you and she's going to open up with you. Well, we know by numbers that that's not true. Women on the whole, we do bring different leadership skills and behaviors to the meeting table. We tend to better empathize with our clients. We tend to better listen to our clients as well, to what they're actually saying and what they mean behind the words. Women are perceived to adopt a more participatory and collaborative style, so we will emote, whereas on the male side, it tends to be speaking is just a means of providing information. That's it. Women in leadership roles provide more motivation for women to succeed. All of us at some point in our lives, we do look up to someone to say, I want to be like that person. I think I can. And when you have more female role models, you are more able, especially if there's cultural diversity as well, you're able to say, I can be like her. I can be this person. There's a greater capitalization of talent as well. When there's the unconscious bias or excluding females from a talent pool, you really are cutting half of what your firm could be as far as talent goes. And study after study shows that companies with greater gender diversity, especially in the C-suite, they end up performing better and doing better on audits as well. I think improved representation of female leaders will lead to a more rounded view for customers. Again, it goes back to who is our customer and what is our customer looking for. More than half of women now control their household finances and are responsible for household savings and investing. If we know that information, as an industry as a whole, we really should be moving towards having that representation there so that we are doing the best job possible for our style of practice and for our style of client that is attracted to us. Next slide, please. Emerging trends. So we are seeing change in the industry, and granted, it is very slow, but we are seeing change. And as long as we continue having these conversations, I think we will slowly get better and better with a changing in perception and attitude and stigma out there. So job descriptions now are finally changing to communicate values as opposed to a very linear, very strict job description. It's putting in more emotive words, more words that females can relate to when they think about who and what do I want to be within my practice. Obviously, COVID was horrible for a lot of reasons, but the one positive aspect that may have come out of it was this whole hybrid flexible work environment. So now jobs aren't as restrictive within the industry as they used to, especially if you're able in a compliant way to do your business from a home office or from somewhere that is does allow you for privacy. There's a greater awareness that we all have unconscious bias, and there's more and more training being done to recognize that, so we ourselves are aware of that. There are now increased mentoring and training opportunities. A lot of the firms are bringing in mentoring programs and sort of templates that will help younger people develop their work experience. There is now increase in visibility in female role models. I'd love to see a bigger increase, but there is. So we do have role models as long as we can relate to them and there is that relatability factor. We're seeing more of a promotion in the whole idea of inclusivity and cultural inclusivity. We do need to understand the sheer importance of parental leave. We all want to do and have a complete life, and that may or may not include children. And if it does, we have to be able to put protection in place where the advisor who's going to be leaving on maternity leave or parental leave doesn't feel anxious about the business that they are leaving behind while away. And I think now, because we're seeing a total shift in demographics, I think we have to be very aware of what our situations are and our clients' situations are about understanding the importance of caregiving, and us as females being sandwiched in on each side. And I think as a work environment, we need to allow that flexibility and understanding. Next slide, please. So what can the industry do to lead the way? I think we can set goals towards hiring more female advisors. I think we can set up things that are strictly for women, so an annual women's symposium, participate in industry leading magazines that features role models. I think the more visual, the better. I think campus engagement is great. If they can see women sitting at the table, I think there would be more of an interest in coming to talk, to have actual conversations with how, what do you like, what you don't, having these candid, emotional conversations. You know, there's all sorts of things like women in capital markets and women in wealth leadership that are open for sponsorship. You can develop a Canadian advisory network, women's advisory councils, where you can actually set agendas and poll the female advisors at your firm to see where does their interest lie, where's their pain point, where are their strengths, what do they need more developed, and bring those support systems in to support everybody's business moving forward, because we all want to be rowing in the same direction. Internal coaching and mastermind sessions. I think mastermind sessions are great. It's so easy to do now that we are all familiar with Zoom, that you can get together with different people and women in your industry, get together, talk about best practices, talk about life, talk about handling life. At national business meetings, set up workshops that are independent, you know, for a topic that women are concerned about. It doesn't always have to be market and economic related. And I think for advisor internship programs, bringing on a younger generation into roles as female advisors, shadowing, getting to know the process, and putting systems in place that support them, as opposed to there's a training program, we've trained you, onto you, good luck. On to the next slide. I really do believe that today, this conversation, it starts here today with us. And the more we can speak about it, I think the more movement that we'll see in our industry. And with that, Tiffany, I'll pass it over to you on the other side of the table.
Okay. Thank you, Neela. That was very informative, helping us recognize the gender gaps in the financial industry and also discussing how it's evolving to be more inclusive. So as you mentioned, I'm going to take a different approach, and I'm going to provide some guidance to all of the advisors on the call, or those who wish to be advisors, about understanding the needs, understanding women's needs as clients. So I'm going to highlight 4 points. One, the growing influence women have as decision makers, considerations to address when preparing financial plans for women, how to gain trust and build those long-lasting relationships, and then give you a few takeaways and a call to action. So this is a slide. Why the focus on women? And when I saw women, when I saw Vish Aki, Molly's executive director, ICICI Bank, which is one of India's largest banks, and I saw her quote, "Globally, women are becoming more educated, economically independent, and financially aware. Businesses must not ignore them." And that applies to our industry. To all the advisors on the call, ignoring women is a detriment to your business. Next slide. So let's talk about who are the influential women of today. Next slide. Women make up 40% of the world's workforce and 40% of the world's entrepreneurs starting new businesses. Women hold 40% of total global wealth. And across the globe, more women are household breadwinners changing the conversation on finances. Women also drive the world economy because they control the decision-making for 67% of household spending. And this is really only the tip of the iceberg. In the US, women are outpacing men in home ownership, and it is estimated that women could inherit 30 trillion from baby boomers by 2030, which would increase their total percentage of global wealth. So given these numbers, it's foolish to ignore or underestimate women as decision makers and the world's greatest influencers. So think about working with women as clients. It provides business opportunities to talk about savings, financing, investing, insurance, philanthropy, and so much more. So how do we tailor advice for the women of today? Some of these that Neela mentioned already, but I'll give it to you from the context of a client, is I know that I just mentioned the growing influence of women and how they control the percentage of wealth that they control. But there's still some key factors to consider when you're preparing a financial plan or providing financial advice to women. And as Neela mentioned, there is a gap in the workforce for women. We're more likely to have those gaps to care for family. We're more likely to start later in life in the workforce. Women are more likely to change jobs, jobs that provide flexibility, which could pay less so that they could take care of children, family members, aging parents. And the result of having that gap in the workforce is that you may end up saving less for your retirement. You may end up earning less. And so that is going to have an impact on your financial plan. Those lost earnings can also disrupt financial stability and reduce your future earning potential to save and invest and build that future wealth. So it's important that we understand women face that gap in the workforce. Now, I know I mentioned also that women are household breadwinners. However, the research indicates that there's still an earnings gap where women earn less than 87 cents or earn 87 cents compared to every dollar earned by men. And so there's still a gap in earnings. And when you're comparing those two situations, think about how your pension is calculated based on earnings. So you could have lower pension dollars. You could have lower retirement dollars. And that means having less available for long-term needs such as retirement. Neela also talked about being a provider and a caregiver. There's also other life events where women experience greater financial impacts from divorce or separation. Women are also 3 times more likely to become widowed than men, which could have a positive or negative impact on their financial plan. And these are all questions to be asking your clients in those financial planning conversations. We also know that women live longer, 5 to 10 years. And so because they live longer, the likelihood is that they'll need to have to save more for retirement. Women are also more likely to require long-term care for a longer period of time. And that provides an opportunity for an advisor to review savings and insurance needs. In all of these circumstances, because of retirement gaps, earning gaps, time outside of the workforce, women are, in a lot of cases, are underinsured or don't have any insurance at all, which is another gap for advisors to address when having financial planning conversations with clients. When I talk about all these financial planning considerations, it's important to not use straight line assumptions. Getting to know the client and asking questions is really, really important, and not making assumptions as, okay, both of these clients or one of these clients will live to 90. Not asking questions about longevity or concerns that they may have about outliving their retirement assets. It is really important to ask questions. So now that you understand the growing influence of women as decision makers and the key considerations, I'll talk about 4 points on how to gain trust and build long-lasting relationships with women as clients. But before I do that, I'm going to give you 2 examples that I thought of when Neela was talking. One is, I remember when I was in an office with another advisor and we were talking to this couple. And as Neela mentioned, the conversation was very one-sided, and it was to the decision maker who wasn't the woman in the room. And at the end of the meeting, I stopped and I said to the wife, I said, you know, is there any questions that you have? Is there anything that we didn't address today in this meeting? And she had said to me, I'm really concerned. My husband is the decision maker. I don't know where anything is. I don't even know if I will have enough. And that's not all cases. You know, there's many situations where women are the decision makers, women have a relationship with the advisor and understand. But it just reminded me of that situation when Neela was talking, that we're not always inclusive as advisors when we are having those conversations with couples. Another example I just came to mind is a few years ago when I was interviewing advisors because I had a change in circumstances and I needed a new advisor. And it was just astonishing to me the number of advisors that wanted to lead with performance and wanted to lead with product and didn't want to ask questions about my family circumstances or what was even really, really important to me. And so that's when I take the first box there. Women want to work with advisors, male or female, who take the time to listen and where there is a personal fit, usually common interest, aligned values, where they feel that they are being heard. Because women do want to be heard and they want to be part of the conversation. They want to share. We know that over 50% of women also want to increase their understanding of financial planning and investing because they value financial education and literacy. They are aware that there is a gap and they are trying to be proactive to learn more because they understand that if they don't know, it could be a detriment to their financial future. Women also want to work with advisors who are going to tailor advice and financial planning to their unique circumstances. Ask questions about longevity. Don't use straight line assumptions. Think about asking questions about their goals, talking about what their plans are for the workplace, understanding the family dynamics. Are there going to be changes to their situation in the future? Instead of just plugging in numbers and assuming that it's going to work that way. It really is a process that is ongoing and evolves with the client. We also know that with women, they tend to focus more on the day-to-day. What does their finances look like today? What's the cash management? Help me understand the inflows and the outflows, the money that I make, the expenses that I have, the tax that I need to pay. Help me understand how all of that works. Help me understand what I need to redirect to savings. Women also want to know if they're going to outlive their assets and have enough for retirement. And spending a lot of time in that area of planning is key. In contrast, we know that men tend to focus more on the big picture of their assets and are more performance driven. So in cases when you are working with couples and different, it's important to get to know everybody who's your client and to ask those questions and really understand what is important to them. And you may find that it's different with all of your clients that you're working with. Next slide. So a few things just to leave you with, and again, Neela did a great job talking about it from an advisor point of view, from a client's, working with women as clients. Just three takeaways is really rethink how you connect and communicate. Neela had mentioned about visual. Are you asking the right questions? Are you listening? And that is really important. So think about in your practice, how do you engage with your clients on a day-to-day basis, your existing and your prospective clients? Think about your client service model so you can address women's needs. Do you provide education about topics that are important to women, that are addressing financial literacy? Is that something that you incorporate as part of your practice? And then ensuring that financial plans really, really incorporate the needs and real life goals and concerns for women. Again, I can't say it enough. Don't use standard straight line assumptions in your financial planning. Really, really think about having that conversation and looking at those key considerations that I mentioned. And lastly, always be learning. It's that you can take some courses to enhance your understanding of behavioral finance, behavioral economics, financial planning, that will allow you really to have a holistic view and conversation with your clients. Marie, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Tiffany, and thank you, Neela. We have a few questions coming in. One of them is what path do you recommend for a woman looking into financial services? I think this question is more for you, Neela, but certainly you can join in as well. Tiffany, if you want to get into the space, and you talked a little bit about women's confidence. So how do you build a woman's confidence? How do women help build their confidence so that they feel, yes, I can do that job. In fact, yeah, give it to me.
So I'll start on the entering the career later in life. You know what, I think we have to come into like an advisory role, confident in the experience we have. When we think about once our practice is built out, who we're going to be advising. We're going to be advising and mentoring clients the same way we would have wanted to be advised and mentored. So I think it's really being confident in that real world experience that you're coming in, whether it was, taking care of a family, working in a totally different industry. You develop a skill set. And the bottom line of being in our industry is dealing with people in a very respectful, very empathetic way. And that's across all industries. So those are skills you can always take. And I think as far as, what courses, I think the first couple things when I entered the industry, so I came over as a second career from long-term care. Immediately, I went to CSI and I did my CSC and my CPH, got those out. And from there, just continued doing courses every time I could. So I think it's, let's not think about, well, we don't have the skill set. We have the skill set. We just need a bit of refinement to direct it within a financial advisory practice. There, that would be my response from this side of the table.
So maybe, Neela, just to continue on that, you shifted from another career into financial services. How did you sort of get into it and take your place in the industry?
So I think I might be dating myself when I say this. So I did move over to this career when I was 28, and I'll be 54 in December. So I came from working in a nursing home. My background is in aging, and the way I decided on this industry was I like the idea of watching movement, watching flexibility, of thinking, what do I want to be able to control and have independence if I am able to invest for myself? What decision making can that help with me later on? And it became the financial services industry, and sort of just got into it because way back when my dad would give us a dollar, like an actual dollar bill, to track on graph paper stocks. So I was sort of familiar with the names, patterns, and stuff like that. That I thought, I like this. I think this is something I can do, and I'm accustomed to working with people of varying who require varying support. And it just became very important to me as well to make sure that for older clients, they can see the need and the reason why they need to invest, because it provides independence later on when they need it most, possibly.
Tiffany, can you perhaps talk a little bit to the confidence element, how you build confidence? Because you strike me as someone who comes at things very confidently, and some of your tricks of the trade would be helpful here.
So for me, I was just a curious learner, and I wanted to understand. And like Neela, I started with the Canadian Securities Institute. I took my CSE, and then I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then I wanted to learn more, and I took on financial planning designations. And I thought, oh, well, I need to know about tax. And because you started to touch on all of the different topics in the learnings, and then I wanted to learn more about estate planning. And so I expanded out and acquired the knowledge that I could have these conversations with clients. And then I was learning about philanthropy, and thankfully in our industry there are a lot of educational bodies that provide education to help guide you. When I saw Neela's designations, I was quite impressed. I was like, wow, I never saw that designation before, or the background that she had to help aging clients making those decisions. And I thought maybe that's something I can do in my spare time. So it really is the confidence that I get personally is through learning and then applying it and having conversations and attending events and speaking with people about implementation and having that network and that center of influence around you to stay connected so that you know what's happening, and that you are the quarterback for people. So you're a connector. That's part of your role as an advisor. You may not be able to carry out the task or have the answer, but you know enough that you can call the individual that can assist that client or friend to take the next steps. And that's what's really given me the confidence over the years.
Okay. Maybe a question to both of you pursuing this question of credentials. One of the audience members mentions that you obviously have a lot of credentials. How do you think that helps you with your conversations with clients?
Tiffany, I since I see that you're on mute, I'll go first on that one.
I was gonna say you have more than I do, Neela.
You know what? I think it helps with conversations because every course that anyone takes might have a lot of overlap. So it does reiterate basic facts and core knowledge. And I think each other course has more selective knowledge that might, so in my case, it's dealing with seniors. So have a greater understanding of a certain disease process, understanding of where the fear of money comes from generationally with certain generations. So I think it helps depending what courses you're taking and the type of clientele you want to attract. There's so many designations now that I think everyone now is understanding within our industry that we all have a passion about a certain aspect of the financial services. For mine, it's aging and end of life. What's yours? So it's discovering what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about educating millennials or the sandwich generation or new parents or divorcees? In which case, there's so many courses that you can take that actually are quite narrow in focus, which gives you that better knowledge in the area that you're totally passionate about. And you will attract that type of client as well because they'll recognize that.
Tiffany, I have a question for the member in the audience about what you suggest, how do you approach a client situation where it is clear that the husband is taking care of the finances and the woman is not going to say anything, and you want to get the women's point of view? How do you approach that without, introducing some kind of hurt or the way people might not take it well?
So I will say that my role right now is not in an advisor capacity, but when I was as an advisor and financial planner, I didn't shy away from those conversations with clients. I would let them know, are you prepared if something happens to you? And I would walk through in the planning and say, it is important. We need to have all this information. You need to share this information. We need to ensure that we have wills in place. If something happens to you tomorrow, is the surviving spouse on both situations going to know who to call, where to get this information, and have the peace of mind, the sleep at night factor, that they're going to be okay? And that was really my role as a financial planner, to ask those hard, uncomfortable questions and make sure that that information was readily available and give them some homework to do. And so for me personally, I didn't have a problem with that because I wanted to ensure, I didn't want to get the phone call that somebody died and they didn't have the information, or someone became unexpectedly ill and they had to sell their home. My role as that advisor was to ensure that they had everything in place for those unplanned events. And so I had those hard conversations.
Right. So you really have to hit it head on, but also from the point of view of the dynamic with the couple and how the woman might be left if she's the one who's left with the finances. So
And nobody ever has those intentions. They don't want to leave a spouse without the sufficient funds to fulfill their goals, for their kids to go to school, to pay off the mortgage, to invest. They don't want those changing circumstances, and it's really digging deep and understanding what they would like in those unplanned events, and then making sure that you have the proper planning in place.
So it's really making sure that everyone's conscious of the possible outcomes and what they need to consider. So engaging a conversation that's larger than just the immediate sort of
A
financial
lot of our
situation.
role as financial advisors is emotional.
Yes.
It's the psychology, it's counseling. If you think about it, who do you speak to have such vulnerable conversations about the amount of money that you've saved, or the amount of money that you didn't save, or the experiences that you had in your childhood? Where did you learn your saving and spending patterns? And has that followed through to the generations? Where does that fear come from that you have? Where is that focus to save? And so a lot of that, it's only a financial advisor that will ask you those emotional type questions. The only other person that I can think about is a doctor who asks you those vulnerable questions about your medical situation. And so it's a privilege to be an advisor, to be able to sit in front of a family or a singular client or a couple, and for them to trust you to be able to divulge their true feelings and their life experiences, and for you to help guide them.
Okay. Thank you, Tiffany. Neela, when a woman is returning to work after taking some time off, how do you recommend that she approach the situation without thinking that she has to come back in at the bottom of the rung?
That's a bit of a tricky one. I would say it actually depends on the industry that you're trying to re-enter. So if you were trying to um, enter a new industry, obviously, I think you should have a bit of flexibility with the idea that, you would have to start at an entry level position to acquire the skill set and the knowledge to continue. But, if you're returning to the industry that you were previously at because you took a hiatus or sabbatical. I think the big thing is keep yourself educated during that time. So be reading articles within that industry, white papers, research. So keep on top of that industry so you're current and you don't have that feeling of the world passed me by while I was doing this. And I'd also say, it's so easy now to search for additional courses and accreditations that you can do, possibly depending what your circumstances and why your time away, if you can put in an extra course to show that you're current. And I think it's using that life skill, so putting on the resume um, what skills you acquired while you're off. And in some cases it could be, I acquired the skill as a caregiver, so I developed the ability to balance stressful situations with current tasks. I developed the ability to have difficult conversations with a parent who has just been diagnosed with stage 3 dementia. So I think it's keeping a list of all those skills that you developed and everything that you did, so it shows that during that time you're still learning. You're learning in a different capacity, but you're still learning.
Right, and you can certainly show empathy to a family that's going through a situation where somebody
Absolutely.
is in mental
Yeah,
decline, or somebody who's got a new family and is
absolutely.
you can kind of speak to that because you have that
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
Tiffany, how do you think about situations where you have a woman who is divorced, who or separated from her partner? The partner has had all the financial information and they don't seem to have any. So, what do you recommend giving guidance on that?
That is a very uncomfortable situation. And when Neela talked about before about designations that you can focus on. So one of the credentials that I did have before was the certified divorce financial analyst, because a lot of the conversations that I had with women, particularly, is that they didn't have this information. They didn't know where any of this information was. And so it was very, very challenging. And I encouraged the women that I was working with that were contemplating separation or divorce before they made that decision, was really to get their house in order. And so having to ask questions ahead of time, trying to get information on statements and the mail and compile all of that. It is unfortunately, if the information is not readily available, a very, very difficult and emotional time when you are separating and divorcing a spouse. And you really, really need to surround yourself with a circle of care. So having the right financial advisor and having the right professionals and the legal team and the counselors and support that are going to help you through that. Because if it's contentious or if it's not a mutual decision, then the period of time to exit and sign on the dotted line can be years in some cases. And so you really need the emotional strength and support to get through that. Hopefully if they're thinking about it or contemplating it again, it's really trying to get that information in advance.
Okay, thank you for that, Tiffany. Neela, we're obviously a nation of immigrants, and some cultures that we welcome to Canada don't necessarily have the same values on gender parity. How do you navigate those conversations and relationships when it may be clear that, you know, either finances are not shared
Hmm.
or they're not shared with everybody?
Hmm. That is a difficult one, because you've rightly stated that we all come from a different upbringing. For me, obviously, I'm Indian. My parents did have that traditional gender role set up within their relationship. Dad worked, dad saved, mom took care of house and home. And for me, the starting of that conversation was, at some point, my mom had one day expressed, it was, I like that lemon. And it's like, what lemon, Mom? You know, that lemon, everybody's wearing that lemon. I was like, oh, Lululemon. And that was sort of the starting of the conversation. It was okay, let's watch this together and let's start to educate you about stuff like that. And I think within a relationship, that if both people are coming to the meeting, that it would be being, sorry, how to put this, being respectful and trying not to offend the male in the relationship, because that is the cultural dynamic. But I think it's also, once you've done speaking to the male in the relationship, that you do, change your body language. So give your body language to that person, and she'll probably be shocked. She'll probably be in a way a bit afraid or a bit ashamed to say anything, in case they say something that you might consider, wow, how don't you know that? But give her the opportunity. And every time you have a conversation with that couple, make sure you give her time. One day she will feel comfortable, and one day the male in the relationship will become more accepting and comfortable with the idea of you're giving her space. And once you have, I think, a good enough relationship with them, then it would be, if something were to happen to you, what's your biggest fear with your wife and your children, or your wife or your family? What's your biggest fear? Let's say it's that they won't have enough. Okay, so let's have a conversation to make sure that your wife has enough. Wife, what's your big fear if your husband dies? That I don't know how to manage this. Okay, let's start with something basic that we can build on, a budget, like a budgeting worksheet. Okay, cash flow. From cash flow, go to investing. And I think it's baby steps, because you're right, you don't want to have this new relationship. And from our culture, North American culture, we have certain expectations, and not all cultures do. So I think it's baby steps, but make sure you give her space and actual physically direct that conversation, so they have 100% of your attention, and you have 100% of theirs.
Mhm. And Tiffany, in a similar situation where you're dealing with maybe the husband and wife in a family, but you know that there are children in the family, and as they age, you know that that wealth will move on to the children. If you're only dealing with the main couple, how do you bring the children into the discussion so that you can ensure that they don't inherit and then take their money to somebody else?
So the intergenerational
Mm.
wealth transfer, the advice is so important. And it starts off where a lot of the financial institutions have literature when they're opening up a bank account. And the investment advisor can make an introduction. The institutions provide literacy training for youth of all different ages. Think about the conversation when you are going to college or university. The advisor, instead of speaking directly with the client, can ask the client to also bring in the child to those conversations to learn about, we're making RESP withdrawals. This is the amount of money that we saved. At 18, opening up a tax-free savings account for them. Opening up the first-time home buyers, the FHA
That's right.
account, so that you're starting to drip and have these conversations with the younger generation. It starts small, but it goes a long way. When, as an advisor, and you're having seminars and events, and you're asking the client to bring along children, you can also even ask them to bring along parents, because what we know in a lot of cases is that the adult children, which could be your clients, are going to be designated as an estate trustee, executor, power of attorney. And so where is that money going to go, and how can we provide that assistance? Also with philanthropy, if your clients, if you know that they are gifting funds, even if it's small, bringing in the family to have a conversation about their giving. That's a great way to connect with the younger generation, even if they don't seem interested. And also parents, making it a family affair. Anything that you can do to have the similar interest and have shared values you will have lifelong clients, and those younger clients will appreciate the advice and the time that you spent with them.
Super. Well, thank you very much to both of you. This concludes our event. I'd like to thank Neela and Tiffany for their presentation from each point of view, the insights on women in financial services, as well as women who are getting advice. If you have additional questions, please email us at designations@csi.ca. The event replay will be available in the coming days. We'll be sending that out, and we'll be sending out answers to some of the questions that we haven't been able to answer. So thank you for attending. Have a great day and good luck on your career path in financial services and making your clients successful, men, women, and families. Thank you so much, everyone.